Before you can understand the present, you must first understand the past.
We're discussing history with Dr. Joe Kelly. Imagine why, Doctor. Thank you very much for joining us.
Imagine why, good hen, Greg, it was a lot day yet. Good morning to you all on Highland Radio.
Okay, so we're going to talk about Christopher Columbus. 1521 was a big year for Christopher. Tell us a little bit about the man.
Well, Christopher Columbus, as we all believe, was the man that found America.
Which I'm sure all the Native Americans were delighted to find out where they lived when this white guy landed.
I'm sure they were. As if they didn't know of their own existence beforehand. But it was he that was being acclaimed basically for finding America. And in 1518, 1522, the first man to circumnavigate the world. He didn't do the whole lot of it, but was 1521 was the year. It was Magellan, Magellan Straits in Southern America and so forth. So it was a big year, and we're kind of 500 years into it. And we're celebrating the whole idea of exploration and so forth, and the finding of new continents.
And just before we get into that, man, it was a bit like something I actually feel about the sort of Native Americans, and I just wonder how would they view this history that we would be sitting here talking about the discovery of this land? Has that ever been an issue of controversy?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's been numerous books on it. There's one great book written by Quigley. It was published in about 1965. And it's History of Tragedy and Hope is the title of it. It's thousands of pages. But in his book, he argues that European culture has surmounted or subdued. There's been 12 civilizations, he claimed, in the world, and 6 of them have been controlled by Europe. So, for example, the age of exploration being one of them. You have the whole movement of other movements of suppressing other cultures over time. But then he talked then about in the millennia, so this was written before 2000, that the East would meet the West, and that there would be a big push. One would subdue the other. And obviously he was talking about the Muslim-Christian culture at his time. But the whole question now is technology. Who owns the technology? And is it technology now that is the new tool that harnesses the world? And if it is, then who owns the technology? And it would seem at the moment that the Western world controls technology a lot more than the rest of the world. Yeah. And therefore, again,
that's the battleground. That's the battle line now, the control of technology.
Yeah. And that's going on. That's the history of humanity. But I think that we've moved on, and, we talk about maybe refugees, and we talk about enculturating, absorbing other cultures into our own cultures, be it our European culture and so forth. So that's always changing and flowing. And let's hope that human beings always recognize that other human beings are equal in their humanity as they are.
Okay.
And just because of the colour of our skin or where we're from, it doesn't make a difference. We're still human beings made in the image and likeness of God as we believe. All
right, so let's talk then history as it is then. So Christopher Columbus, this is the 16th century, isn't it? So where was he originally from? Because he did make a visit to Ireland, of course. Where was he originally from? And set the scene as to what they would have been trying to achieve at this time.
Well, it's a good question. He was actually an Italian, and he'd read Marco Polo's journey into China. He was there in the 1270s, around that time, Marco Polo, and he returned after 24 years and talked about China, the Silken Road and explosives. And this got into his head big time, Christopher Columbus, and so he wanted to sail and explore. And he went to the Portuguese first, and they didn't listen to him, and then eventually it was the Spanish that listened to him, and they gave him the 3 boats, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Marina. And that ties in with the Irish connection, because in 1477 he came to Galway. And while he was there, he met this fella that went on the boat with him that went to America. I apologise for my Portuguese, Guilherme Harris. And nobody had a clue who this Irish man, this Galway man was, but it's been translated as William Harris. And William obviously told him about his experiences of travelling off the west coast of Ireland. But what intrigued Christopher Columbus was St. Brendan. St. Brendan, he was able to tell him the stories of St. Brendan. This is back in the 500s, had explored this part of the world, and that there were books written about it, and this seemed to have fascinated Christopher Columbus. So I'm of the belief, and some historians are, that Christopher Columbus actually came to Ireland before he set off for the Americas to explore, to find out what the Irish knew, or what the St. Brendan knew. And
he was a Google of the time. He says, right, I'm undertaking this epic journey, this life-defining journey, a journey like going to Mars. There would be no guarantee of ever returning, something along those lines. So he said, and going along with your theory, I need all my information, and I'm going to go and see what the travelling St. Brendan did, the sailor saint. So we'll pick up from that again. But this Brendan gentleman, this saint, sounds like a fascinating character. What was his what did he do?
Well, it's an amazing man, and maybe St. Brendan was a contemporary of Columcille, which ties into our 1,500-year celebration this year of Columcille, 521. St. Brendan was born in 484, and he died about 577, so he lived a long life, but he was an explorer. He was from Kerry, and then he built a monastery there, and then he moved to Galway, Clonfert, and they believe that he had about 3,000 monks, friars around his monastery. But he went back to Kerry, and the story goes that this man, Bannet, he came into his monastery one time and told him about the story of this promised land. And he talked about Slieve League, so the people up about Glen Columcille would be happy to hear about that. But this promised land was a concept that was in Irish psyche. It was called the island of High Brazil. I is island in the old Irish, and then Brazil was the king of the world, so to speak. And there was this imaginary island that came up every 7 years, like it was in a bubble, an air bubble, and it was a place of perfection. It was a heavenly island. And it's in Irish folklore. And so he discovered this story, and Christopher Columbus heard about it, but so did St. Brendan previously. And when he found out about this, St. Brendan decided that he would explore. And he set out to explore, to find this island. Now, he had previously travelled around. He'd gone to Iona to see Columcille and so forth. So he made a boat. And it was the whole story is written down in various manuscripts.
And did this island have a location? Like, did they get a crew together, loaded up with food, walk up the gangplanks, hoist the sails, set their compass, believing they were going to a destination, or was it if you sail, you will come upon it? Bring us into the cycle.
You're asking a very good question, and it's a question I cannot exactly answer, but just as preparation, firstly, he got a boat made, wooden frame, he covered it in ox hides and tanned it and smeared it with fat. He built this great boat and put a mast in the middle of it, got supplies, brought extra ox hides to make another 2 boats in case there was damage. So he did all the preparation and foods, and according to the manuscript, Navigatio Sancti Brandani, the navigation of St. Brendan, there's a full account of what he did. And the idea was that he would go and find this island. Now, you're asking me, where was the island? It was an imaginary island. It was very much in the psyche of people, and it really caught on after St. Brendan's time in Europe, particularly in Germany, in the Low Countries. There was about 100 manuscripts subsequently written in different languages. There was one published in Germany, in Augsburg, in about 1490. They were so fascinated with what St. Brendan was trying to achieve.
Yes.
And these islands were actually mapped on some European maps. Now, where they were, you and I don't know, but in their mind, in medieval times, they believed that they did exist. And a Genoese map from 1325, it shows that it's southwest of Galway. And then a Catalan map from a later time shows that the island of Brazil. Now, this is not Brazil as in South America.
Yeah.
That comes from the Latin amber, the word amber, the red colour, that was originally called that, but this is a different Brazil.
So like, I could just imagine, you can imagine, and you look out to the sea, and sometimes I think, it's a human flaw that we seem to know everything, and we know what happens if you sail west from Donegal, what you'll hit. But just this notion back then that they looked out at that water and they were undertaking this purely on a belief. It could have been based presumably off what someone else saw before and reimagined and sort of like Chinese whispers. But that sort of amazing intelligence and industry, but also that naivety that must have been there as well. Not in the belief, but in actually thinking they might come across it.
Oh, yeah. I mean, but you can imagine these people were intelligent people and wanting to explore and to find out, that drive.
So exciting.
Yeah, but don't forget at the same time, there's no martyrology of Ireland. Nobody died for the faith in Ireland a century after St. Patrick came, and we were Christianized rather quickly. And so all these monks were walking around Ireland rather bored because there was nobody to Christianize. And so they decided, let's get into our boats and let's go and bring Christianity to the rest of the world. Yeah. And at that time, the Roman Empire had imploded. And it was called the Dark Ages, so to speak. The lights went out on Europe, the Middle Ages. But there was a light on this island off the coast of Europe, which was Ireland, and it became known as the Insula Sanctorum et Doctorum, the island of saints and scholars. And here all these monks set off and headed out towards Europe. And there's about 70 monasteries scattered throughout the whole of mainland Europe, and as far as Kiev in Russia. These monks moved out. So St. Brendan was part of that whole culture of travelling, of exploring, of going to new places. And, we have Columbanus, for example, probably most famous, headed off to Bobbio. And Bobbio, the city of Bobbio in Italy, it closes down every year for a day to celebrate his feast.
So what did the Sailor Saint, did he discover what he believed to be Brazil, or not actual Brazil? What did you call El Brazil? High Brazil. Sorry. What? When historians like yourself sit down and come up with some sort of try to come up with some sort of consensus, what was High Brazil? Was it ever discovered, or what?
Well, I personally believe that it was actually it came on shore, and it's where I live at the moment, a high place culture, good culture and high civilization. You might claim it might be more towards the south of Donegal.
Mullinasol Pier, that's where he landed. The pier in Mullinasol.
I think Donegal.
I'll get on to Master Ferreter. I'm sure he's a great historian in our area too. He might maybe put us right on that. Maybe that's where he landed in.
Yeah, but the island played in the psyche of Ireland for centuries. It's an imaginary island, and we've got to remember these these manuscripts that were written and these accounts that are told were very much biblical based, and so it was kind of the gateway to paradise, to heaven, and there was the belief that this was the island before you went to heaven, the gateway to heaven.
Understood.
And according to the manuscript, he did find it, but he had to travel for 7 years, and see, 7 is the perfect number, 7 days of the week, 7 continents of the world, 7 colours of the rainbow. So this whole biblical idea of 7 years. Yeah. But in the manuscript on St. Brendan, it's very interesting the places he mentioned. And for a person of that time, talking about those things, it would lead one to believe that he had to be there. How did he talked about these waterfalls of ice. He talked about, for example, the whales, the region of the whales. We believe that's Greenland. The region of the fog, that's Newfoundland, on top of America there. He talked about the island of the three choirs. Some claim that's the Bahamas. He talked about the island of grapes. He talked about foods. He talked about volcanoes and these massive balls that were firing into the sea. And we believe that that's the volcano.
Yeah, you couldn't pull that out of the air. I mean, that's something you'd had to have... it's easy for us to say, having seen images or having travelled there, but this was probably must have seemed otherworldly at the time. But what kind of a vessel would they have set sail with? Because they'd have had no idea, presumably. There'd have been some knowledge of movement of water and what have you, and maybe seasons, but no real knowledge or prediction. So what kind of a extent of a vessel or boat would they have had to set up on these amazing adventures?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and unfortunately there are descriptions in the Navigatio Sancti Brendan, the navigation of St. Brendan, the manuscript. It tells exactly what he had and what he used, and other manuscripts as well. And it was basically a wooden frame with ox hide on it, stretched out ox hide, fresh ox hide, and then they would put fat on it to kind of seal it. And they carried extra hides. Now, you're asking a very good question. Could this, and it seemingly was partially covered and there was a mast in it. So obviously they had technology relevant to the time he was up there with it. But there was a man called Tim Severin, and he only died there last December in 2020. And he set out to figure out whether this was possible or not. And he created a boat according to the same regulations or the description in the manuscripts. And in the 17th of May 1976, with 49 ox hides on his boat, he set sail to see if this could be done. And it took him 13 months to sail 7,200 kilometres. And he did reach Newfoundland land.
He did it.
Yeah, and he showed that it was possible for the likes of St. Breton to do this. Now, he obviously went up by Iceland and round, and he believed that that's what St. Breton did as well. So, and that man's just died there back in December. And there's a documentary and a book about it, The Breton Voyage by Tim Severin. Very interesting. So, look, the facts of what's in the manuscripts that tell us about St. Breton makes it very interesting and questions us and saying, look, with the knowledge of the time, he had figured out stuff. Where did he get that knowledge? And secondly, then, the kind of boat that he built has been proven that it could sail. So
well, I mean, when you think about it, right, you get the basic, these are industrial people, you get the basic shape of a boat, and you say, well, how do we keep the water out? And you say, right, well, a hide has obviously, and fat has some sort of insulating qualities, and you say yes, but the water will come down from the sky and fill it, and those hides will maintain the water within the boat and it will sink. So what do? Well, we stretch them out over the top of it as well. So it's not beyond the realms of possibility that they figured all of this out. In the last minute or two that we have, right, I just, you see what happens nowadays and in more recent history where certain countries colonize others or try and make out, they own them and they always have and all this kind of stuff. Did Columbus, back to the beginning as we end in a minute, if you don't mind, did Christopher Columbus discover America, or were we sitting there, having a can on the shores and wondering who's this fella landing in the boat? Maybe we were already there.
Yeah, well, that's the argument, and there's historical evidence to suggest that the Irish possibly were there beforehand, and other cultures, the Danish and the Norwegians had come down as well. But the question you ask about, did we discover a new culture? Well, the new culture that we discovered was already there. And unfortunately, there were benefits and there were positives and negatives. And we're living with coronavirus now. One of the things that Christopher Columbus and the explorers brought to the South America was, for example, the flu. They had never had the flu. And millions of them died because of this flu.
Wow.
From them, we got things like potatoes, oranges, stuff like that. So coca, tobacco. So there was a cross culture of. So
they gave us all those lovely things, and we gave them the flu.
The flu.
Wow, things just don't change, do they?
Fortunately, as well, that was the beginning of the slave trade.
Yeah.
Christopher Columbus was a man that he brought a few slaves back with him, and we know then the history of that into the present time.
And you just see the triumphalism of going to the moon and jamming your flag in it and saying, I own this, I was there first, and you can just see man's psychology and all of that. Leif Erikson, do you know who he is?
Yes, go ahead, yeah.
Who is he? Someone says, could you ask Joe who he is? But we only have a minute. Can you do that in a minute?
I can't say I'm familiar with them, no.
Okay, no, that's fine. It's just a random one. I don't know. I haven't a clue. It could be your neighbour. I haven't a clue. Right, we'll have to come back to another time. But listen, always fascinating.
Before I go, just a big shout out to thanks to Patrick Boner. He's a historian, a gentleman, and Burton Court. And anytime I'm looking for books, for example, to do what I'm doing today, talking to whatever, he's more than helpful. Just to say thank you to him, and also to your own producer there, Carolyn. She's very, very diligent, and just to thank her and to say good day to yourselves.
Okay, so from Letterkenny to High Brazil, we wish you a great day. Thanks, Joe.